You are listening to No PC Allowed, aka No Political Correctness Allowed, and I am Mac Iverson. Tonight we have a special guest, Dennis Brennan, and he has written the book, The DC Swamp Strikes Back. And welcome, Dennis.
Thanks, Mac, for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I wanted to start off by just asking your purpose, because I will tell you my purpose is in some small or big way to change the world. That's why I'm doing the podcast. And I imagine this being your first book, this is something that maybe is in the back of your mind. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but what's your purpose for this book?
Well, there's probably more than one purpose, I guess. I really want to make sure history treats the Trump era correctly. A friend of mine wrote a book about Aaron Burr. I read it, and he asked me what I thought, and I said, I think you missed the story. I think the real story here is Aaron Burr and Donald Trump were treated so similarly that there's something to be made out of that. And I think the problem is, Aaron Burr has been denigrated as the bad guy over the years in American history. It didn't help with the musical Hamilton, kind of told from the point of view of Hamilton. And Burr, in history, is treated as a traitor. He's charged with treason a couple times. So I was afraid, because you see how the media and Trump battle back and forth, that's how Trump would be treated. So I think it's important for people to really investigate. That's what I did. Made sure I documented everything with Trump, with Burr. If anything was said, whether it's the news media, other politicians, so forth, make sure everything has a reference. And I think what it does is, going forward, if people have books in the future, and I hope they do, they have a book on their bookshelf and they can go, wait a minute, that's not what I read. The way they're talking about Trump, let's say 40, 50 years from now, we want to make sure that it's, been documented, that some things in the media aren't true.
Mm-hmm. All right, very good. So the commonalities, do they have, what would you say is like 2 or 3 things that Trump and Burr have in common, or is that even the point of the book at all?
Yeah, some of it's, there's really a couple points to it. Yeah, there are commonalities between the two men, and there's commonalities between the way the swamp battled both of them. So Burr and Trump both come from New York, both kind of in, not kind of, they both came from, well-to-do families. Trump's dad was also a developer. It's often said that's how he built his business. He, got money from his dad and started the business, which, God, I wish I had that. Burr's father started Princeton University, and he was an attorney. So neither of these guys were poor. They both went to Washington kind of naively, thinking that everybody gets along in Washington, everybody's going to be your friend. Burr, was kind of the toast of D.C. and the Jefferson administration, because he brought New York in. He switched New York from, John Adams in the first race, when Adams and Jefferson ran, to Jefferson in the second race. And he did that, old-fashioned politics, getting people elected over in New York to change the electoral votes. And, Trump, we've lived through that. But I think naively he went into Washington thinking those people that he thought were friends, would all fall in line and be friends with them and try to get things done. And, they both found out that's not the case. Everybody's out for themselves in Washington.
Mm-hmm. Was this a deep state back then, do you think?
I think there was. We really, even though it was a smaller country, you had Virginia, which was really the center of the deep state, in that, at least in the Jeffersonian time. Jefferson was surrounded by people like Madison and Monroe, who, they had this idea that Virginia would have the presidency for many, many years. They would just go through all these guys. And in a large part they did. But, Burr was kind of the guy that would upset all that as the vice president, the New Yorker, because had he stayed on as Jefferson's vice president the second term, it's likely he would have been the candidate running for president. That's kind of obvious. So even in the first term, a lot of the Virginians wanted to get rid of him, and they did everything they could to run him down with Jefferson. They were always in Jefferson's ear, saying you can't trust Burr. They really didn't want him, on the ticket for the second race. And the second race being Jefferson and Adams ran, Adams won. Jefferson and Adams ran a second time, Jefferson won. And then the third race was Jefferson's re-election campaign, and that's when Burr was dumped from the ticket. And that's where even more of the problems came up with the deep state. It was enough to get them pushed off because now they could put someone on and eventually had this Virginia presidency going on for a while. The deep state, they had a lot of relatives, back then. Madison and Monroe had control of the newspapers and, some of the U.S. attorneys that they had placed all over the country, which came back to haunt Burr when he was charged with treason in Missouri. The guy charging him, the U.S. attorney, was a relative of Monroe, and he was not only, he also owned a newspaper, so he was doing everything he could to blow up Burr as a politician in the future.
Unfortunately, a lot of people know history as a bunch of dates and names and places. Well, not even if you ever watched Jaywalking or Jesse Waters, and they don't even know that. That's more like my era when I was growing up. But they don't know much more than that sort of thing. So just if you kind of give a synopsis of the Jefferson and Aaron Burr, they were both the same party, right? Democrat, Republican. That's what they called themselves.
Yes.
And then
yes.
Alexander Hamilton was a Federalist. And so is there any connection too much? I know we're talking about completely different eras between then and now. Is it Democrat, Republican? Is that like Democrat? How's that work?
A lot of the same thoughts that the Jefferson people had are what today's Republican Party has. But no, the parties have changed so much, I wouldn't connect it that way anymore. But yeah, a lot of times when you read about Jefferson, you're like, wow, he was right about these things. But that comes from people that are, Republican in nature saying that he's right in these things.
Kind of projection.
Yeah. And I think, you're right. We think history, we don't learn much. Aaron Burr, which was what fascinated me. What I knew about Aaron Burr was that there was a duel with Alexander Hamilton. Right. Who, Hamilton and Burr didn't like each other. It goes back to New York. Hamilton, there were really 5 families in New York, much like the Mafia. And they ran politics there. Right. And the
Mafia's still around here.
Yeah, Burr wasn't part of that. And Hamilton disliked him. He didn't want him anywhere near the presidency or vice presidency. And even though he was in the other party, he did everything he could to prevent that from happening. So, and I think Burr found that, some of that he didn't understand because he was an outsider. So I think the problem is, in history, what we remember is, oh, you have this duel. I think everybody learns that in school at some point. We don't learn much else. If I learned about what was called the Burr conspiracy, I forgot about it until I started really researching for the book. And that, occurred. That's what he was charged with treason for twice. The allegation being that he was going to form his own army, take the army westward, and fight Spain. Spain at the time controlled what's now known as, the southwest part of the United States, California, Arizona, several other states around there, and Mexico. And, and start a war with them. That's what they tried him for treason for. He was the beneficiary of a technicality, I guess, in the law. You need 2 witnesses to place you in the conspiracy. And when he was tried the second time, the Supreme Court justice who oversaw the case, John Marshall, he said, if we don't have 2 witnesses, you're out of luck as the prosecutor. And he acquitted him, and I think, to some extent, Donald Trump had some good fortune with some of the judges during his many trials. He had some bad luck, too, in New York. But, the federal judge was good for him. I think even the judge in Georgia was okay. But those, following the law it seems like a lost art among some judges any longer.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Was Burr a heroic figure, would you say, in any way?
Yeah, he was part of the Revolutionary War. George Washington, he was very close to Washington, who loved him. He was, it's kind of forgotten because obviously everybody knows about George Washington in the Revolutionary War, but he was heroic in that he did fight in the Revolutionary War, as many of them did. But he didn't have, like Alexander Hamilton had kind of a soft job in the military, to almost be like a clerk. So Burr was an actual fighter. He was an officer, but he was also a fighter.
Yeah. So I believe we live in a fallen world, and corruption is a never-ending battle. Is the swamp inevitable?
In the book I talk about the battles that they've had. There's another book many years ago that was written that detailed this much better than I did, actually, but I reference it. And we've been fighting the swamp. They left out the swamp that I refer to here with back when Jefferson was president, because Jefferson with the prosecution of Burr was doing kind of what Biden was doing with Trump. He was directing the prosecution, and by having his U.S. attorney involved, there were allegations later that all of that was coming out of the White House, which we heard that during Trump's many legal problems. But we had Reagan fought what he called a swamp, the bureaucratic swamp, and Kennedy battled with the CIA and FBI, and some believe he was killed for it. And he goes back to Teddy Roosevelt, even Lincoln, that there was a swamp then. So it seems like they've always had their hands on everything. I think now we have it, and some people ask how come Trump hasn't gotten rid of it. It comes back to that question of inevitability. I think one person or even one party can hardly get rid of it. Probably because both parties are part of it.
Right.
I think that may be part of the big problem.
What about the idea of just getting rid of political parties? Because they seem like such a narrowing funnel, like a funnel of all the special interests going to one side, and we have to fight the other side now. We got to get a bunch of money. Oh, we have to beat them. We need more fundraising, and it's back and forth. And it seems like these two parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, are just sort of like funneling all this corruption. Is it possible that maybe we can go back to the good old days and just judge people on what they say and what they do instead of party affiliation?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like when George Washington left office, he urged everyone not to have political parties, and of course we didn't listen, and here we are. And the problem is, how do you do it? It's hard to believe, because you think like Washington, that seemed like acclamation. Everybody thought, yes, he should be the president. But how often does that come along? I mean, now, I wonder. I had this conversation with someone in another interview. You had John Adams running against Thomas Jefferson. Forget about the parties. That's unbelievable, right? In our minds.
Right.
And I think now we think, how come we can't get any good candidates? You hear that all the time. And the parties. I agree. The parties now, with the money funneling, you're getting the extremes, right? I mean, the Democrats, totally. It's the progressive guy is the guy that's getting his voice heard out there, and everybody's running to the left in the Democrat Party because that's where the money is, and that's where the active voters are.
Yeah,
and, and it seems like that's what the Republicans were too. Trump kind of changed it into more of a Trumpism or something. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know how that stays. It's not. I wouldn't call it the same conservative that we had with Bush and Reagan.
Yeah, it's more the individual, sort of like Charlie Kirk. When Charlie Kirk was murdered, and I believe it was a mob hit, but when he was murdered, that's a tremendous loss. He can't be replaced. I think a lot of people are thinking, with all the attention, and we're going to get tremendous fundraising, all these chapters going, we're going to get like 10 or 20 or 30 Charlie Kirk someday or more. And I don't think so. There's only one Charlie Kirk, just like there's only one George Washington, there's only one Abraham Lincoln, there's only one Donald J. Trump. So that's
I have that same feeling with Charlie Kirk.
That was a mob hit.
Well, that's the mob hit part. I really, I haven't gotten into all that stuff. I know there's a lot of theories out there. I've heard Israel, I've heard the mob.
Well, getting back to that real quick, and I don't want to put a pin in what you're going to say. I don't want you to forget what you're going to say. But what I mean by that is Soros and China, there's so much money involved in the brainwashing business. And this kind of hatred just doesn't grow on trees. I mean, I think I say this sometimes, I think there was a price tag attached to his pierced nipple on this guy who murdered him. I mean, he's not even in control of his own thoughts. To look at the weird lifestyle, he was like a furry and trans and homosexual, who knows what. One of the many letters, the WTFs of all the letters, the LGBT WTFs, and somebody's paying for that. And I think it's China, it's Soros. I don't believe a word of Soros. And he says he's anti-communist and pro-Israel. Everything he funds and everything he stands for is anti-Israel and pro-communist and pro-terrorist and anti-American. So
that I agree with, and I'm surprised so many people take his money and seem to get away with it.
Well, it's good old-fashioned bribery, isn't it? Isn't it just good old-fashioned bribery?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And some of this they're funneling in, from foreign. Foreigners aren't supposed to be able to donate money, and here you just funnel it in through other organizations.
Yeah, it's proxies.
So you get around it.
It's proxies. And there's a lot of people, the World Economic Forum, the Council on Foreign Relations, I mean, United Nations, all sounds so wonderful and respectable and all that kind of thing. And it's just a good old-fashioned money laundering outfit. It's like the mob graduated from urban mafia, in the 20th century to global, where the really, really big money and the really big control is, because it's basically control over 8.4 billion peasants, as an oversimplification, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying it's wrong. I think there's certainly the money that's come in political races and otherwise, just in advocacy or whatever you want to call it, indoctrination. I mean, with the schools. You wonder how this guy became the way he was. I don't know. Social media is part of it. Certainly our education system is part of it.
Yeah, it's like segregation. You see what you want to see on social media. It's like you can go into YouTube. If you watch some videos on similar videos, keep feeding your mindset, so you become like intransigent. Like there's nothing else out in the world except these stupid videos that keep following me, and I keep watching it. And you got to be careful, that kind of thing. You got to be really careful, because that's what they do.
Well, you do, and unfortunately, it seems like whatever you follow, you end up getting more of, and whether it's through advertising or just it's your feed. And I've often been asked that too, like, what's on your feed? Well, I thought everybody's feed was the same, but it's not.
No, it is not.
And you see some people, it's amazing the differences depending on who made the comment. And if you go through the comments, which can be mind-numbing, you realize, holy cow, there's a lot of people that are crazy.
Yeah. Well, they don't have any, especially on the left, they don't have any common sense or reasons behind their arguments. It's just like ad hominem, abusive fallacies. They just call you names. And that's all they got. They're like little kids. It's amazing. And our side, too, of course. It's a human nature thing. I guess we want to protect, or it's too much cognitive dissonance or something like that would be going on with us if we didn't protect our psyches. And that's what we're doing, is protect. It comes down to human nature again. That's what we're doing, is trying to protect ourselves psychologically.
Well, no doubt. I saw a comment today, and sometimes you don't even know if these comments are old or whatever, but John Lithgow, the actor, was making a comment about Trump, and it's like, it's all the stuff that everybody says. There's no backup to it. Like, it's almost like when you read a story in the media, and you're like, okay, well, where are the facts in this story? Because all I'm seeing here are opinions, and they're opinions someone else said, and you're repeating. And usually it's the party. You're just, one of the things that kills me when you watch, whether it's Sunday news programs or other news programs, and they have guests on, I always hate it when they bring on consultants of either party, because they're just spouting the party doctrine or their talking points that they got from the headquarters. I don't need that. I know what your talking points are. Right. I want you to analyze what's going on.
Right, exactly. So a little more nuance to this as far as Marjorie Taylor Greene and the current drama of her quitting. Is there a major schism coming with MAGA, do you think? Or has it already been here and we're just not everybody's talking about it?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a major. I think there's, in any organization you're going to have some breakaways. And I think you saw that happening with Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's funny, the one thing I got out of that, which probably might not be what you're supposed to get out of it, but I didn't know if you serve 5 years as a representative or a senator, you get a full pension, which is $175,000 after 5 years. I don't know. Most people have to work at least 20. I mean, in their job, but the job's a lot harder to be a rep. That always amazed me, and now she's retiring, whatever it is, 2 days after she gets the 5 years. But it seems like she's always been, hard to nail down. She was always like an odd voice, that's a negative voice on whatever you're trying to do. And, I think she thinks this is going to set her up for something else. I don't know that it does. I think they're better united rather than dividing all over the place. Right. But I could be wrong. I mean, maybe she thinks, like, if Trump's successful, J.D. Vance seems like the candidate for president in 28. I don't know how you beat him in the party. And maybe she thinks she can. I just don't see the path. But especially if you leave as a representative, what are you going to do? You're going to raise money by just, I don't know, going on TV? Is that the plan?
Yeah. I want to ask you about Chapter 7, election deniers and election interference, then and now. And if we could go into a kind of a short synopsis on, the differences then and now.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because when, election denial became such a big deal with Trump, well, heck, they charged him, right? Federally and state charges against him for basically denying the results of an election. And, if you go back, though, it struck me, right away that there was an issue, in the Bush-Gore campaign. Because, people, when the Supreme Court said Bush won, basically, that was the chant that he won 5-4 with the Supreme, because it's 5 Supreme Court members that said he won. Could have gone the other way. And over the course of, since that time for sure, the Democrats have denied the validity of elections constantly. They've also denied that the voting machines are fair and tabulate correctly. But that all changed, obviously, when Trump was bringing up the same issues.
Right. On a dime, they stopped on a dime and they switched opinions, right?
Right. And I mean, over the years, it's funny how these same people would say, like Hillary Clinton, I talk about her in the book a few times, there for a while, she was saying she was, elected. Trump stole it. There's no doubt it had to be Russia, which is hard to believe because I find nothing about her appealing as a candidate or a person. So I don't understand why she has such a high opinion of herself that she would think, a majority of the, votes would be hers. I don't.
Yeah.
I would be, if I were her, I'd be like, boy, it's going to be tough to win this election against anybody. I mean,
right.
If there was a real Hitler still, it'd be hard to win if it was her. And she, for some reason, had such a high opinion, even after, like everybody that's running a race and loses, your initial reaction might be, how did I lose this thing? They must have cheated.
Yeah,
exactly. Some way they cheated.
She must have a lot of faith in the election, apparatus that, she must too much faith.
Right. But to sit there, Stacey Abrams did the same things for how long. She said she was governor of Georgia. It's like, no, you're not. You lost that election.
Right.
But when you say election denial, most people, because of the media, think of Trump and the people around Trump. And it's kind of funny that's it's really something that's been around longer.
Take it and twist it. My theory is that, and I believe this, is that they learn a lot of this from China, because China, even before they got established as a communist government on mainland China, one of their main goals was to overthrow the United States of America, way back when, and they have their 100-year goal of global hegemony, and that's by 2049. So it's coming up. It's a long ways away, but really not, if you think about it. And I don't trust China. They have this thing called Assassin's Mace, which is basically hiding in plain sight. And, if we can do all these horrible things and people get used to it, then we jump at you like a rattlesnake. Open borders, for example. Well, it's okay. We learn to live with it. But no, it's extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous.
In the first term, remember with Trump, the media made it out that Trump was nuts because he was saying China is the real threat. And it's not Russia. And now we see, Russia can't even win, maybe they ultimately can win in Ukraine, but geez, it's taken a long time and they haven't won. And, you think, are they the superpower anymore? No, I think Trump was right. Again, China's the superpower. And they're a superpower that has a lot of their people here, for school and otherwise. And are those people spying? Some of them are. There's no doubt.
Well, a lot of the Chinese are, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, if you're loyal, if you're from China, you're probably. I mean, I had someone that I was corresponding with over the book at some point, and she was. She was very negative towards Trump eventually, and then she became hostile, about the United States falling, and she's from China, and I'm like, at that point we're calling each other names. I'm calling her a little commie, and it's like, come on, but.
I've experienced the same thing too. Yeah, the same thing. They are brainwashed. They are brainwashed. They love. They can't even say anything really bad about mouse dung. You know who that is. Mouse. Yes. I call it mouse dung. Yeah. And they say, it was bad. Mistakes were made, and they say stuff like, "Are you kidding? You don't know history. You don't even know your own history." It's amazing.
Well, or they don't want to admit it. I mean, at first I thought, you just don't want to say it because you think we're being listed on or something, which maybe we are.
They love to do that.
But then at the same time, I think, as it got further and further, I'm like, no, I think she really believes this stuff, and she thinks, and I did ask, what are you doing here? Why are you in our country if your love for China is so strong? Go back there. I mean, obvious question, I think.
Well, one of their goals is to colonize us.
Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah.
Well, that's the issue. Like, I'm not leaving until I, have you in chains.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So, what is the major lesson takeaway with your book here?
Well, I think the major takeaway is, that the things that happen to like President Trump. He often said this never happened in the history of our country. I guess technically he's right, because it'd be hard to find another president, and I looked, who suffered as much lawfare as he did. But Aaron Burr is a good runner-up as the vice president, and I think what it tells you is our history, while it might not repeat, there's an echo to it. You're going to get some parts of it that are there, and Burr went through a lot. When you're charged with treason, you're up for the death penalty. He was charged twice for the same act, but they certainly wanted to not only ruin him, but put him in prison or to death. And I think if you look at what we saw with Trump, the ultimate goal was to imprison him.
Yeah, 3/4 of a millennium, basically.
Yeah. We can't look back 200 years ago. Everything was great. There's some things they were doing that are just as bad as what we do now as a collective society.
Well, Abraham Lincoln once said he was a guest at a sermon at a church, and he was asked what he thought of the pastor's sermon. He says, "Well, it was great in many ways, but there was no." To paraphrase, there was no action step. There was no call for action. So, what can we do? What can we do? What's my thing is, I believe we need to have a renaissance of personal responsibility. That nothing changes unless we change. And if all we're doing is staying busy and making idols out of things like our families and wives and kids, which is very tempting, and most people do that, of course. But if God's not number one, if Jesus is not number one, we're going to have problems, and we have problems. We really do. We got to change. And go ahead.
I think some of that it kind of lines back to what we were talking about with Charlie Kirk. He was making, I think, great headway in that regard.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
That's why I know it was a mob hit. Okay, it's not a conspiracy mob hit. I'm not talking about crazy stuff here. But when the billionaires and China have these goals of getting everything for themselves and not allowing any competition, I call that the mob. I call that organized crime in the 21st century.
It's kind of like a deep state or a swamp for the world.
Yeah, I call it the deep state mafia.
Yeah. I think but Charlie, and I had followed a lot of what he was doing at that point, and I thought I really looked into him after he was killed. I only knew of him. He was at the convention, that kind of thing, and I knew who he was. But because so many people attacked him when he was killed, especially on social media. You read things and they say, I'm not sorry because he was a racist. And I'm like, when was he a racist? I look up his videos. I go through all these videos. The proverbial rabbit hole, I was in there. And I was looking because I'm like, I don't think so. I've seen a lot of this. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't, it's a disagreement. He'll say a family is better off with the father in the house. A family is better if they're religious. They believe in Jesus Christ. And you're like, okay, that's doesn't make him a racist or anything else. Yeah. He's just he's espousing an opinion.
Yeah, that's just
on how life would be better.
It's no brainer and common sense, really. If you understand the world and history and Christianity, he just made total sense, and he had the bravery to step out and say it, and consistently. That's what he was. He was rarefied, and especially in the courage department.
I think so, and I think he was bringing a lot of people along, and a lot of these younger people who would see him and became fans of his, and that part. Hopefully, that seems like it has grown. There's more people now that say they're religious, and where that was dead. Younger people especially. It's like, yeah, they might have gone to church because the parents made them, but as soon as they could quit going, they quit going. And go to college, you'd never go again.
Right.
And then they don't really raise their own children that way, or they don't even see the importance of children or whatever. But I think he did have an impact on that. Can it last? I think you're right that he's not replaceable. And I think, while, Turning Point USA is probably going to benefit in the short run at least, without that charismatic leader, I kind of look at it like the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King was like 1 in a million, maybe 1 in 100 million. And I think, there were a lot of people after him and with him at that time, but none of them had the same impact he did. And I think that's going to be the same thing with Charlie Kirk. It's going to be hard to see anybody be the same or as good as him.
Well, I do appreciate it. How do people get a hold of you?
Well, I have a website. It's called author.dennisbrennan.com. I'm on X as Dennis Brennan, at Dennis Brennan 61. I'm on What's Truth Social, Dab 535. Also on Facebook. I don't know what the connection is on that, but Dennis Brennan, my photo is there. And the book's for sale at Barnes & Noble and my website, and Amazon. So you can buy different versions on all of those.
All right, very good. The DC Swamp Strikes Back with author Dennis Brennan. Dennis, I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me, and I enjoyed our talk.
You've been listening to No PC Allowed. I am Mac Iverson.